There's a quiet moment that keeps happening to a lot of people. You're lying in bed at night, phone in your hand, thumb scrolling without thinking. And there it is again. Someone you know, a vacation, a new car, a renovated kitchen, a dinner that looks expensive enough to make you instinctively check your own bank balance, even though you're not buying anything. And the thought creeps in almost automatically. How are they affording this? Not angrily, not even with jealousy. More like confusion mixed with a little shame. Because on paper, you did what you were supposed to do. You work, you try to be careful. You think before spending. You worrying about money because you know it matters. And yet somehow, it feels like everyone else missed a memo you never got. They look relaxed. You feel tight. They look ahead. You feel behind. And after enough of those moments, something starts to settle in your chest. A quiet fear that maybe you're doing something wrong. That maybe you're too cautious, too slow, too boring. That maybe everyone else figured out how money works, and you're the only one still counting grocery items in your head. Here's the uncomfortable truth. That feeling isn't a personal failure. It's the result of comparing your real life to other people's performance. Most of what you're seeing is not wealth. It's not success. It's not even stability. It's an image. And images are cheap to produce. Money has always been emotional, but today it's also theatrical. We live in a world where financial stress is hidden and spending is broadcast, where people show the reward without showing the cost, where the appearance of doing well travels faster and farther than the reality of how fragile most finances actually are. And when you're on the other side of that screen, all you see is the highlight. You don't see the anxiety. You don't see the trade-offs. You don't see the debt, the help, the timing, or the pressure. You just see the result, and your brain fills in the blanks in the most painful way possible. It assumes they're winning and you're losing. Because when you believe everyone else is ahead, every normal financial decision starts to feel like a mistake. Saying no feels like failure. Being careful feels like falling behind. And that's not true. Not even close. What's really happening is that you're measuring yourself using the wrong yardstick. Your worries versus their photos. Your trade-offs versus their moments. Your full story versus their edited clip. That comparison will always hurt because it's not grounded in reality. Think about how strange it actually is. You know every detail of your own financial life. The bills, the doubts, the little calculations you do in your head before spending. The long-term goals you don't talk about because they're not flashy. But when it comes to other people, you know almost nothing. You don't know what they owe. You don't know what they're worried about. You don't know what support they have, what they gave up, or what they're quietly stressed about at 3 in the morning. And yet, your brain treats their lifestyle as evidence. Proof that they're doing better than you. That gap between what you know about yourself and what you assume about others is where most financial anxiety lies. It's not that you're behind. It's that you're seeing an illusion and calling it reality. This illusion doesn't just come from social media. It's everywhere. In neighborhoods where houses look identical from the outside but feel completely different on the inside. In parking lots full of expensive vehicles that tell you nothing about the person driving them. In conversations where people casually mention trips, upgrades, and purchases, but never mention the stress that came with them. We're surrounded by signals that scream success, without any context for what those signals actually cost. And the human brain is terrible at handling that. We're wired to compare. It's how we've always made sense of our place in the world. But comparison used to happen in small groups, with shared information. You roughly knew what your neighbors earned. You knew who was struggling and who wasn't. There was context. You're comparing yourself to people in different stages of life, different family situations, different safety nets, different risk tolerances, and different priorities. And you're doing it without seeing any of the constraints they're operating under. It's like watching a movie with half the scenes, missing and judging yourself for not understanding the plot. And over time, this does something dangerous. It shifts how you think money is supposed to feel. You start to believe that being responsible should look exciting, that progress should be obvious, that doing well should be visible. But real financial stability is almost invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up in photos. It doesn't demand attention. It shows up quietly in the absence of panic, in the ability to handle a surprise without everything falling apart, in the freedom to say no without fear. Those things don't photograph well, so they rarely get displayed. What gets displayed is spending, consumption, moments that look like success even when they're built on something fragile. And here's the part most people don't realize until much later. Looking rich and being secure often move in opposite directions. The pressure to look successful pushes people to make decisions that feel good now but make life tighter later. And the people who avoid that pressure often look average for a long time while quietly building something much stronger underneath. From the outside, those two paths can look identical for a while, but they end very differently. If you've ever felt like you're falling behind even though you're trying to do the right things, this is why. You're not bad with money. You're not slow. You're not missing some secret. You're just seeing the surface of other people's lives and assuming there's solid ground underneath. In many cases, there isn't. And once you understand that, something shifts. The comparison loses its grip. The pressure softens. The feeling of being late starts to dissolve. Not because you suddenly have more money, but because you finally see what you're actually comparing yourself to. And in the next part, we're going to slow this down and look at the everyday situations that trigger this feeling, the subtle behaviors they create, and why so many smart, hardworking people end up feeling financially behind even when they're not. Let's bring this down into everyday life, because this feeling doesn't usually show up during big dramatic moments. It shows up in small, quiet ones. You're at the grocery store, standing in the aisle longer than you should, deciding whether to buy the brand you like or the cheaper one. You do the math in your head, not because you can't afford food, but because you don't like the feeling of not knowing where your money is going. Later that same day, you open your phone and see someone you know posting from a restaurant where their plates look like art and the lighting looks intentional. And suddenly that careful choice you made an hour ago feels small. Not wrong, just small. Or you're driving your car and it makes a noise it didn't make before. Nothing serious, probably, but your stomach tightens anyway. Because even small surprises feel heavy when money has consequences. You turn the radio up a little louder, as if that might make the sound go away. That night, you scroll again. Someone just bought a house. Someone else is talking about renovations, new furniture, a backyard, a life that looks settled. And without meaning to, you start replaying your own decisions. Should I be further along by now? Did I play it too safe? Why does it feel like everyone else is moving forward faster than me? These thoughts don't arrive as panic. They arrive as doubt. And doubt is harder to notice, but more damaging over time. Because doubt slowly changes behavior. You start second-guessing good decisions. You wonder if saving is just another way of delaying life. You feel a subtle pressure to spend, not because you want the thing, but because you want the feeling you think comes with it. The feeling of being normal, the feeling of keeping up, the feeling of not being left behind. So maybe you say yes to something you were planning to skip. A trip, a purchase, a monthly expense that didn't exist before. It doesn't feel reckless in the moment. It feels reasonable. Everyone else seems to be doing it. And that's the trap. Most financial stress doesn't come from one big mistake. It comes from a series of small choices made under quiet social pressure. Pressure that rarely announces itself. It sounds like I deserve this. It sounds like it's not that much. It sounds like I don't want to be the only one not doing this. And slowly, your money starts feeling tighter. Even though nothing dramatic changed, you still earn roughly the same. You still live roughly the same life. But the margin is gone. That's when the real stress begins. Not the kind where you can point to one problem and say, that's it. But the kind where everything feels a little heavier than it used to. You hesitate before checking your account. You avoid opening certain emails. You feel a background hum of anxiety that never fully turns off. And what makes it worse is that from the outside, your life looks fine. You're functioning. You're responsible. You're doing what adults do. But internally, you feel like you're running on a treadmill that's slowly speeding up. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They don't feel broke enough to panic. They don't feel secure enough to relax. They're in between, and that in-between space is exhausting. You see people upgrading things you're trying to maintain. You see people spending freely while you're calculating. You see confidence where you feel caution. And the natural conclusion your brain jumps to is simple. They must be better with money than me. But that conclusion skips an important step. It assumes that what you're seeing is the full picture. In reality, you're seeing outcomes without inputs, results without process, comfort without context. Imagine watching someone cross a finish line without seeing the race. You don't know how fast they ran, how long they trained, or whether they even ran the same course you did, but you still compare your position to theirs. That's what most financial comparison looks like now. You're comparing your day-to-day reality to someone else's moments, and moments are deceptive. A single post can represent months of saving, years of debt, help from family, or stress that hasn't surfaced yet. But your brain doesn't register that. It registers the image and fills in the story automatically. They're doing great. So when your own life feels slower or quieter, it feels like a problem. This is especially true during certain life stages. When people start buying homes, when people start getting married, when people start having kids or moving to bigger places. These milestones are highly visible, and visibility creates pressure. Even if you logically know that everyone moves at a different pace, emotionally it's hard not to internalize it, because milestones feel like proof that someone is on track. But here's the thing no one says out loud. A milestone doesn't tell you how sustainable that life is. It tells you that a decision was made, not whether it was a good one. Buying something is easy. Paying for it over time is not. And yet, we treat the purchase as the achievement. If you're reckless, you don't feel behind. You feel busy. If you're thoughtful, you feel delayed. Because careful decisions often don't produce immediate visual rewards. Saving doesn't look like anything. Avoiding debt doesn't feel exciting. Staying within your means doesn't come with applause. But opting into visible spending does. It comes with validation, comments, nods of approval, a sense of belonging. And humans crave belonging more than they crave financial stability, even if we don't like to admit it. So the stress you feel isn't just about money. It's about identity. It's about wondering whether you're doing adulthood correctly. It's about worrying that caution means weakness. It's about fearing that stability might secretly mean stagnation. And when you sit alone with those thoughts long enough, it's easy to believe that the solution is to change your behavior. Spend a little more. Upgrade a little faster. Stop being so careful. But that urge isn't coming from a rational place. It's coming from comparison fatigue. From being constantly exposed to signals that tell you you're behind, without giving you any real information about where you actually stand. Before we talk about numbers, before we talk about strategies, before we talk about what to do differently, we need to understand why your brain reacts this way in the first place. Because until you understand that, every financial decision will feel heavier than it needs to be. In the next section, we're going to talk about what's actually happening psychologically when you look around and feel like everyone else is doing better than you. Not in technical terms, not with labels, but in plain human language. Before money ever becomes a math problem, it's a meaning problem. Numbers don't stress people out on their own. Stories do. And whether you're falling behind is what gives those numbers emotional weight. And that story is being influenced constantly, even when you're not aware of it. Your brain is built to understand the world through comparison. It told you whether you were okay. That instinct never went away. It just moved into your finances. So when you see someone else living in a way that looks easier, more comfortable, or more exciting than your own life, your brain doesn't process it neutrally. It treats it as information about your own position, not consciously, automatically. It asks one simple question: am I doing enough? You knew the full picture. You knew who had help, who was struggling, and what sacrifices were being made behind the scenes. Today, comparison happens without context. You see the output without the input, the reward without the cost. The moment without the months or years that surround it. And your brain fills in the gaps in the worst possible way. It assumes the result reflects the person. If they have more, they must be better, smarter, more disciplined, further along. That assumption feels logical, but it's deeply flawed. They're influenced by timing, family support, location, luck, health. But your brain doesn't see those variables. It sees a snapshot and turns it into a judgment. There's a psychological shortcut happening here. When information is missing, the brain doesn't wait. It guesses. That's why comparison rarely motivates in a healthy way. It usually discourages. Another layer to this is something called normalization. Whatever you see often starts to feel normal, even if it's not typical. If your feed, your workplace, or your social circle is filled with people spending at a certain level, that level starts to feel like the baseline, not aspirational, expected. So when your life doesn't match that baseline, it feels like you're underperforming. Not because you are, but because your reference point is distorted. It's like walking into a room where everyone is wearing designer clothes and suddenly feeling underdressed. Even though you were perfectly fine 5 minutes earlier, nothing about you changed. The environment did, and modern environments are saturated with spending. We don't broadcast restraint. We don't highlight patience. We don't celebrate saying no. We highlight purchases, trips, upgrades, milestones. And once that belief takes hold, it's very hard to shake. Because now, every time you choose not to spend, it feels like you're choosing not to succeed. That's not a logical conclusion. It's an emotional one. There's also something else happening that most people don't realize. Your brain is terrible at distinguishing between frequency and intensity. If you see 10 different people post about vacations over a month, it feels like vacations are happening constantly. But in reality, each person might only be traveling once or twice a year. Your brain collapses time. It takes scattered events and stacks them on top of each other until it feels like a non-stop stream of success. So what you perceive as everyone is always doing something is actually many people doing one thing occasionally. But perception doesn't work in averages. It works in impressions. And the impression you're left with is that life is passing you by while you're being careful. That impression creates emotional pressure. Pressure to catch up. Pressure to prove something. Pressure to align your life with what seems normal. And under pressure, people don't make thoughtful decisions. They make reactive ones. They spend to relieve discomfort. They upgrade to quiet insecurity. They borrow from the future to feel better in the present. Not because they're irresponsible, but because they're human. Another important piece of this puzzle is identity. Money is not just a tool, it's a signal. To yourself and to others. When you spend, you're not just buying an object. You're buying a story about who you are: competent, successful, on track. When you don't spend, especially when others do, it can feel like you're telling a different story. One that you worrying might be interpreted as failure, even if no one actually says that out loud. So avoiding spending sometimes feels like social risk. And humans are deeply uncomfortable with social risk. We would often rather feel financially stressed than socially out of place. That's why people stretch themselves for visible things, not because they don't understand the math, but because they understand the social consequences of opting out, or at least they think they do. There's also a subtle moral layer attached to money that complicates everything. We tend to believe that good outcomes mean good choices, that success means correctness. So when we see someone doing well, we assume they earned it through better decisions. And when we don't see the same results, we turn that assumption inward. What am I doing wrong? But this ignores a basic truth. You can make reasonable decisions and still move slowly. You can make risky decisions and move fast. Speed is not proof of sustainability, but psychologically, speed looks like competence. Slow progress doesn't feel like progress, even when it is, especially in a culture that celebrates immediacy. This is why so many people feel like they're falling behind right before things start to stabilize. They're in the boring middle, the part where you're building quietly, but nothing looks impressive yet. And when you compare that phase to someone else's highlight, it feels like you've failed. You haven't. You're just early in a process that doesn't advertise itself. The last psychological piece here is something simple but powerful. You feel your own financial friction. You don't feel anyone else's. You feel every bill, every decision, every moment of hesitation. Other people's friction is invisible to you, so your brain compares your full experience to their frictionless image and concludes that they must be doing better. That conclusion makes sense emotionally, but it's wrong. And once you see that, something important happens. The comparison starts to lose authority. You stop taking it as evidence and start seeing it as noise. In the next section, we're going to talk about what this illusion actually costs over time. We'll introduce numbers slowly, not to scare you, but to ground this conversation in reality. Up to this point, we've talked about feelings, comparison, and perception. Now it's time to talk about the quiet cost of believing the illusion. Not the dramatic cost, not the overnight collapse. The slow, invisible one. When you spend to keep up, you're not just spending money. You're spending future calm, a little breathing room, a little ability to respond when something unexpected happens. And most of the time, that cost doesn't show up immediately. At first, everything still works. The payment fits. The lifestyle looks fine. Nothing breaks. That's why the illusion is so powerful. But over time, your financial life becomes rigid. Every dollar has a job before it even arrives. There's no slack, no margin, no room to make a different choice without stress. This is what people rarely talk about. The real cost of chasing appearances isn't the thing you buy. It's the life you lock yourself into afterward. When your money is fully committed, your options shrink. You can't leave a job you hate. You can't handle surprises without anxiety. You can't slow down without fear. And the worst part is that from the outside, it still looks like success. This is why so many people feel trapped while appearing ahead. They didn't fail. They succeeded at the wrong goal. That's the invisible consequence. Now here's the turning point, and it's not dramatic. It's a quiet realization. Most people you're comparing yourself to are not playing a better game. They're playing a louder one. Once you really internalize that, the pressure starts to loosen. You stop asking, why can't I keep up? And you start asking, what am I actually trying to build? That question changes everything. Because when you shift from appearance to stability, your decisions start to make sense again. You realize that being careful isn't weakness. It's strategy. That saving feels boring because it's working in the background. And that's when you can start operating with intention instead of reaction. So let's talk about a simple framework. Not rules, not hacks, just a way to orient yourself in a noisy world. Separate lifestyle from identity. What you own, drive, where. When you stop using spending as proof of competence, you remove a huge amount of pressure. You no longer need your purchases to speak for you. Protect your margin. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you commit. That space is where peace lives. The goal isn't to maximize how impressive your life looks. It's to maximize how resilient it is. Margin gives you choices, and choices are real wealth. Redefine progress. Progress doesn't have to be visible to be real. Paying something off, building a small buffer, making a boring but steady decision. These don't feel exciting, but they compound quietly. Compare less, measure better. The only fair comparison is you versus your past self. Are you more stable than you were last year? Less stressed? More prepared? Now let's ground this in something realistic. Imagine two people earning roughly the same amount. One stretches for a lifestyle that looks successful. The payments are manageable, but tight. Every month requires attention. Any disruption creates stress. The other chooses a quieter path. Fewer upgrades, more space, less visible progress. In the first year, the first person looks ahead. In the second year, still ahead. In the third year, still fine. But over time, the second person accumulates flexibility, the ability to handle change, the option to pivot. Eventually, the paths cross, not because the second person got lucky, but because stability compounds just like debt does. This is where many misconceptions live. People think real wealth requires extreme income. It doesn't. People think stability is boring and limiting. It isn't. People think they'll feel successful once they look successful. Most don't. Another common misunderstanding is that opting out means deprivation. It doesn't. It means choosing what actually improves your life instead of what signals success to others. There's a big difference between spending because something adds value and spending because it adds validation. One builds satisfaction, the other builds pressure. Over the long term, the payoff of choosing stability is subtle but powerful. You sleep better. You react less. You stop feeling like you're constantly behind. You don't win attention. You win calm. And calm is what allows good decisions to stack on top of each other. Eventually, something interesting happens. You stop noticing what others are doing as much. Not because you're above it, but because it stops feeling relevant. Their choices don't threaten yours anymore. That's real confidence. So here's the calm truth to end on. If you're saving anything, you're ahead of many. If you're avoiding high-pressure obligations, you're ahead of most. If you're thinking long-term in a short-term world, you're ahead even if it doesn't feel like it. The people who look like they're winning are often just louder. The people who are actually building something are usually quiet. And that's okay. You're not behind. You're not late. You're not failing. You're just choosing a path that doesn't perform well on a screen. And in the end, the goal isn't to look rich. It's to live without constant financial tension. That's what real progress feels like. Quiet, stable, unimpressive, and very, very real.